Hi, we're going to be taking a look at how the tonal multi-sequencer works. This is an in-app purchase available through extensions that can be found in settings. What the multi-sequencer is essentially bringing the power of drum tracks to tone tracks. In a drum track, you've got 16 pads, each with independent sequencers that can have different settings, notes, and effects. Up until now, every tone track was but a single sequencer. Well, now it's 4. Let's take a look at how that works. I've got a simple chord. Whoops, we're skipping ahead. Ignore that you can see that. Okay, we've got some chords set up on, you can hear them here. Nothing special. But normally when somebody plays a piano, you know, they play one thing on the left hand and another on the right. Instead of fusing that into one sequence, let's treat them as 2 different sequences. We can even treat maybe just a single finger as a sequence. To do that, I'm going to use the new multi-sequence button up here. This pulls up the multi-sequence keypad. On the top 4, we can access the 4 independent sequencers. So I've already loaded some notes into sequence 2 and sequence 3 for purposes of this demo. Beneath this, we have some options to help configure the interrelation between the 4 sequencers. For each sequence, you can set up every option, which says, hey, on this loop through, should I play this pattern? So maybe you want to play sequence 2 pattern twice and then sequence 1 pattern once. So in a way, you can create chains this way. You can randomize those chains using chance, and then you can apply choke through the chokes and choked menu. To use chokes, just like click that or click that, and you'll add it to the option, and then go to a different sequence and set that. So now sequence 2 will choke sequence 1. But we're going to turn that off for now. And that's how this menu works. So using this, you can create interesting relationships between these 4 sequences. But you can also do that in a variety of other ways. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute this guy, and we'll get to playing again. In fact, let's load that up. So you can see I've got an independent sequence playing its own notes. Let's take a look at the real magic that makes the multi-sequencers so powerful in tone tracks. And that's the way they route through FX. So first, let's talk about echo, peak, and melt. I'm going to do this by looking at sequence 3. You'll notice here that sequence 3 is actually echoing track 3A. I have to change that, sorry, that's old nomenclature. But it's really echoing this sequence here. So I can add my chords to sequence 1, and then in sequence 3, I can riff off of those chords using the FX, which is exactly what I'm going to do. So the way I set that up too is I go to settings, I turn on echo, I select the current track, and then I use either this or this to select the specific sequence that I want. Then I can go into my FX and I can turn on the ARP for just this sequence, sequence 3, and I can set some warp settings to just this sequence, sequence 3. So now it'll play higher and it'll play the ARP. So I'm going to unmute that and we'll hear it. And so it's this relationship between the sequencers and the independent FX that allows you to create related but interesting variation between all of them. The way the FX work is below in the bottom row, speed, warp, and gate. Each have their own independent settings for every single sequencer. So notice, let's turn off shift. If I go into warp for sequence 3, it's been raised 2 octaves. But if I go into warp for sequence 2, no octave shift. The top 3 rows, harmony, arp, and hue, they have just a single set of settings for the entire track, but you can decide which sequences are routed through. So right now, only sequence 3 is routed through the ARP. If we go to sequence 2 or sequence 1, we can turn the ARP on by pressing it and then unmuting. So to unmute, we press shift and we select style. I don't think it's going to work in the way that I want it to with the mouse, sorry about that. But you can also mute by pressing shift and selecting ARP here, or by going into FX and long pressing. That turns it off and on, which is effectively muting when you have the multi-sequencer set up. So in this way, you can select which ones, have harmony applied, which ones have ARP, And they'll all have the same settings applied, but they're starting from different roots, and that creates really interesting musical variation. And that's how we can also, get all of this from a single track really, really quickly too. And then we can play with those independent seeds and continue to route those through other tracks. So you can really do a lot here. The final thing I want to show is how this works in the track mixer view. It essentially works the same way as the drums, where you have this track level sequence mixer, but then you can select a pad and you get the pad level mixer with independent settings here. So, but if I go back to the track, those are different. So that works the same way here. I select the graphic to toggle between the track level view and the sequence level view. I can also use the keypads to toggle between them and the sequence trigs. And so each one has its own velocity shift, and you can set up its own swing and humanize, but you can also link them. So if you're comfortable with how the drum tracks work, you'll be really comfortable with how the tone sequencers work. If you've got any questions, as always, let me know. If you have ideas, I'm even more excited to hear that. No, I'm just kidding. Throw me whatever you've got. Have fun playing. Until next time.